Welcome back to the Transforming Basketball podcast. Today we're joined by Gabriel Barbosa. Gabriel and I connected several months ago on Instagram and immediately hit it off. I was really impressed reading his dissertation, which he's just done. And I think it's always interesting because people ask me for empirical research proving the CLA works specific to basketball and a basketball study. And Gabriel's done some incredible work with this dissertation, and I wanted to invite him on to talk about that and how it relates to his experience as a coach in Brazil. Gabriel, it's a pleasure to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here, Alex. So you are such a inspired coach for me. I saw you a few years ago, and I've been watching everything you do. About your book is a great thing for basketball, and CLA is a great combination. And that's it. I think it's really hard to find CLA empirical research. That was my main goal in my dissertation to try to relate with basketball situation and with the youth level. But I tried to make all the way through from under 12 to under 20. I had only a few athletes, so I cannot say like we have a lot of sample, so I can prove everything, but it is a start, it is a start.
I love it. And I think it was a pretty good sample size because what, it was 80, was it 80 players? I think, if I remember.
Was 30 players,
Oh, my
30
bad.
players,
Okay.
because was six players from each category.
That was it. It was the
Okay.
six age groups, under
Yeah,
12 to 18s. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I did like three on three with four types of constraint to see what happened on this type of small-sided games.
I love
Uh,
it. So let's get into that, Gabriel. I've got a bunch of questions here from reading the dissertation, and I'm obviously hoping that it's published soon so that
yeah,
all the
yeah. I want
coaches
to publish.
listening can read it. Um, so could you just explain your context for the coaches listening in terms of how you're both coaching in Brazil and kind of what level you're coaching, and the work you've done at university and how you bridge both elements?
So was kind of a emergent situation because I was when I started coaching with 19 years old, but coach youth level, and I always try to understand how can I change the way I teach players because I didn't want to repeat what I was taught when I was a basketball player, So one day I found the Kirk Short, the Canadian coach on
Yeah,
YouTube. A
exactly.
YouTube clip that he says, "Don't teach them plays, didn't teach them how to play," and that kind of blew my mind on the time. And when I was 26 years old, I am 31 right now. When I was 36 years old, I start coaching in a professional level here in Brazil. I started in the Division Two, assistant coach in a Division Two in Brasília, in Cerrado Basketball. And then I coached for a year as assistant coach and under 19. And then we went to the first division. The team went to the first
Excellent.
division, and the pandemic comes in. And the pandemic comes in 2020. So we had a lot of time, and then I figured out to try to go to a master's degree and I got in touch with embodied cognition. I start to study about cognitive psychology. How can I improve my coaching through cognitive psychology? And I found embodied cognition, and I was like, this is almost the same thing that Kirk taught like 5 years ago, 7 years ago. And I went to a pedagogical university from University of
Okay.
Brasília on the pedagogical area with specialization in cognitive psychology, and I found ecological dynamics.
On that.
So
That's
over
great.
5 years ago, I found it, and I was like, man, this is such a great way to understand the skill development, to understand how the game is moving, how the game is developing, and I try to connect everything with in my coaching. with ecological dynamics because I think it was so convergent, you know. And then I start my master, and I try to dive in every aspect of the CLA, of the ecological dynamics with the CLA, and I try to bring about some results in small-sided games
Yeah.
for youth level, you know. So I could make some more empirical research for this area that is growing and show that it works, you know.
I love it.
And
It's needed because it must be, I can count on the fingers of one hand here the number of studies we have right now specific to basketball that are ecologically kind of initiated. I think we've got more looking at small-sided games, but not specific CLA. And like I always say,
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
difference,
yeah,
between small-sided games and CLA. So I loved reading the dissertation, and I think it was really good because you outlined all the ecological language and the theory, which I always think is very important. So the title, I'm just going to read it out, Gabriel, for the listeners, and then I'd love if you could just expand on what the title actually means for the coaches listening and really what you were doing and what the aim of writing this piece was. So the title was The Effects of Offensive Time and Decision Making on the Tactical Performance of Youth Basketball Players During 3-on-3 Small-Sided Games. So I'd love it if you could just talk a little bit more about how you laid it out and really what you were doing with this dissertation.
Okay, so first thing was when I was studying the CLA, I was like, how can I measure that? How can I measure? It's so hard to measure because it's such a different way to think about cause and effect, you know. And I don't want to. And a lot of ways to measure things in basketball come from another framework, not from a dynamical system framework, you know. So I looked for a type of measure that was made for a professor here and a coach here in Brazil, and they tried to connect ways to actions that basketball players do in offense and do in defense. They say dynamical space dynamical creation and space protection dynamics, right? And I tried to measure through that, but I
Hmm.
was like, okay, so how can I do small-sided games with CLA? So I thought about four types of constraints, right? So the offense time is like the shot clock. So we have 12 seconds on the shot clock and 6 seconds on the shot clock, play 3-on-3. And what
Yeah.
is the difference between them two? And then we have 5 seconds to have a decision maker. So the athlete can get the ball and he has 5 seconds to make a decision. So he can pass, so he can dribble, he can shoot. He have 5 seconds. I'm sorry. And the other constraint was like you have 3 seconds to make a decision. So you have less time to make a decision. And then we give like 6 seconds with 3 seconds to make a decision. 6 seconds on the shot clock with 5 seconds to make a decision. And we try to look for what was going on, you know. So and I try to relate these constraints with the theory, with the constraint-led approach theory, and how the constraints can limit some behaviors, but how can the constraint enable some behaviors?
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes when we say constraint-led approach, the connotation of the word constraint looks like we are limiting, right?
Yes.
But we are limiting. This is the half of it. The other half we are enabling
Yes. I love
to
that.
yeah,
You are. You're constraining to afford or enable. I like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
That's great. So, okay, so those are the constraints. And essentially, in terms of how you set the study up, so you have these 30 players in different age groups, and they're from one club in Sao Paulo, I
yeah,
believe,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, the
And
club that I was
yeah,
Corinthians,
it
that
was
was
the club. Awesome. And so they were doing these small-sided games. And could you talk more? Because I think this is really interesting, Gabriel, how you were measuring it. You spoke about it was those two metrics, right? Really, I can't remember the terms you used. It was like space. It was something related to
it's
this.
like space creation dynamics
Yeah,
and
I'd
space
love to talk
protection
about
dynamics.
that.
Yeah, so this is a measure that two professors, one coach and one professor in Brazil they made because they watch like a lot of games, like a lot, and then get some patterns from what the offense does. So
Okay.
pick and roll, and if pick and roll, drive, spot up shot. Uh, 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 if you play one-on-one on the perimeter, if you go to the basket, if you post up, so they have all these categories, right? And then on the protection side, it's like how you play defense on the pick and roll, the ways
Okay.
you play defense on the pick and roll, the way
Yeah.
you play defense on the off the ball screen, the way you play defense. So if you're neutral, you go into the middle, you go to the baseline. So I was measuring that, and I correlate those situations with positive outcome and assists, you know.
Okay.
So
Okay.
to
Great.
see which type of constraint is a really tough because what type of constraint can make you behavior in certain manner, like can make you be attracted to certain affordances, you know.
Yes.
Then you
Yes.
can try to use it.
Love it. So this was the study. What were the findings? What did you see with the data sets from how you set this up?
So the findings was that if you have less time on the shot clock, if you have like 6 seconds, yeah, 6 seconds, you're probably gonna make more individual decisions. You know, you're probably gonna drive to the basket, or you're gonna try to shot the ball as quick as possible. And on the age 18 and 20, 18, under 18 and under 20, we have more collective solutions when you put some less time on the shot
Sure.
clock. We can have more, we're gonna have more individual this decision making, but at the level of 18 and 20, we still find some collective
So I get like
situation.
a pick and roll or like a two
Yeah,
person
yeah,
trigger more. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
things like that. And then uh, we didn't found any difference between the 5 and the 3 seconds to decision making.
Okay.
Uh, we found the 12 seconds. If we have 12 seconds on the shot clock, you probably gonna have more assists on the game. I think because if you have only 6 seconds and you drive to the basket, you think a lot about you are really going to the basket. You know, when you have more time, you have more possibilities to action to give an extra pass or
Yeah.
things like that.
Exactly.
So I think, and I said on my dissertation that I have only 30 players and six from each category. So I cannot say that like this is the result, this is what happens. No, this is something that I found with a sample with this size, and there's some way to contribute to the research on the CLA level. You know.
Yeah. Exactly. I think temporal constraints, just time, it connects though, Gabriel, like with everything I've been doing practically. And I think one of the most consistent kind of constraint manipulations I use is shot clock in all the small-sided games. And I think you have to do it because what I often see too is when I first work with, especially youth players, I see that they're very scripted, trying to run patterns on offense, like pass and cut, which I've spoken a lot about. And what I often find is that the best constraint to get them actually attuned to affordances which are more attractive and aggressive is the short clock, where you literally just play a 3-on-3 with, like you said, a 5 second, a 6 second clock. If you do that, it makes a huge difference versus if you just say, all right, games approach 3-on-3, go, and you're not constraining it, they're just going to do the same behaviors and look for the same intentions that they've always had.
Yeah, that's it. I really like to play with the shot clock. Sometimes when I coach my under 22 team, I play 5-on-5 with 14 seconds, right? Play 14 seconds. 14 seconds, the game with 14 seconds, right? But if you score under the first 8 seconds, you give more you give the double. If you make a 2 points, that's worth four. If you
Love
get a
it.
three, that's worth six. And then that's it's such a messy, but you see a lot of emergence of really drive to the basket, being aggressive,
Great.
and you know, it's
It's
really
great.
great.
I think what I'm thinking, Gabriel, like listening to this, just want to echo out to coaches the importance of I think I'd kind of challenge coaches listening to this to have a shot clock on every small-sided game in the next practice. I think it's the
Yeah.
easiest way to use the CLA better. And I don't know about you, but few things I've done is number one, the coaches I work with start getting in the habit very soon of giving the shot clock in everything we do, or training the players. So what we've done is when we have a player waiting in a small-sided game, they are actually counting the shot clock out, or we get the
Oh,
defense to do it. And I found
oh,
that
that's great.
it's so much more consistent if you do that in everything we do. Like yesterday in practice, I was doing a one-on-two gauntlet, right? Where we had one defender in each area and they had to get the ball across the sideline, going in one on two. I initially did it without a shot clock, and you can imagine what happened. The behaviors weren't realistic. They were taking like 15 dribbles, and then you just
Yeah, yeah.
constrain it, 8 seconds, boom, changes everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You see, and you can use I use time and I use like decision making to time to decision making. Sometimes I do some constraint like 3 on 3, but if you get the ball, you cannot fake, you cannot fake, and you only can dribble in vertical, or you cannot just get and dribble the ball. So you gotta attack, you gotta get the ball attacking, you gotta shoot, you gotta pass. If you're not, it is a turnover,
I
and I
love
try
it.
to use, yeah,
I love it. Something we've done there, Gabriel, is we've done something I've tried is when you have the dominoes, the advantage, you must be
yeah,
0 seconds, just like you said. And we ban fakes like jabs and all that. And then if
yeah.
you're neutral, we'll give you an extra 2 seconds to get to the trigger. But if you're not making an intent, if the intention isn't there to get into the trigger, turnover. And it changes a lot. So I want to ask you this. A lot of coaches say, all right, can you give me a study comparing a CLA group to a dominant approach group of drills, right? And can you do this compare and contrast where you compare CLA to the drill approach? And it's
Mhm.
very difficult to do something like that because of, basketball is a complex system and all the variables at play. Could you explain just so the coaches listening why doing a compare contrast study like that is really challenging?
Yeah, because as you said, basketball is a really complex environment, So how can you know what are the specific causes that make behavior happen, and how do you know in this situation, the behavior solve the problem. But how do you know this behavior gonna solve every time this same problem? Because it's not a well-defined problem. It's not a mathematical problem. So you have so many variables that you can measure, and then when you go but you can do it. You can do it in some situations, right? In basketball, you can do it. You can compare, and you can some studies that compare.
Yes.
I don't remember I if I went through a basketball study, but I went to a tennis study that
Yes.
compare.
I
Soccer
remember.
study, we have a lot of soccer studies, and then sometimes the effect is the same. The effect is the same on the test, right? But on the retention is different. And sometimes the measure is the same, but the variability or the adaptability is different on the group of the CLA. So you have a range uh, of solutions that is different from the drill or the traditional approach.
That's it.
And I
Yeah,
think one guy, he's one of the guys that I studied from is the Rob Gray.
exactly.
He's
Rob's great.
podcast for yeah, and then he has a lot of those type of studies in his website, right?
Yeah. He's got the one. See, I think you described that so well. And I'm actually speaking with Gray Thomas, who's, a colleague of mine here at Transforming. And we are talking about actually doing this where we set up like a number of players in different groups and we get them doing CLA activities, traditional activities, and we compare the results. And exactly like you said, on a test might be the same, or even the traditional group do better, but then the retention, the performance itself, we see the difference. But then, like you said, it's the cause effect is always challenging because you could have a kid in the traditional group, but maybe he spent his whole youth playing in a park or practicing variably with his friends, or maybe forms of life. Like maybe his dad was a professional player and he got to hang around pros, go to practices and learn from watching their behaviors, right? And that's why I actually think the CLA framework is even stronger because it accounts for those things when we look at the three types of
Yeah.
constraint. And it's acknowledging that all, individual task environment, it's all of these things which are having an impact on the player. And I think that's different to the dominant approach where I think coaches view it much more as cause effect, where it's like, I want to do this drill, it's the linear effect, they're going to get better. Would you agree with that?
No, I agree so much with that. And I think like this. Sometimes I feel like as coaches, and I did this before, right? I'm trying to not did this to do this right now, but sometimes we think basketball has one solution to every problem. We have one solution
Yeah.
to every situation. Sometimes,
It's common.
So if
Yeah.
you play a step on the pick and roll, so you pass the ball right there. And then you pass with the one hand, you put your feet on that side. So if they are, so we have this thing, right? And this is a cause and effect thinking
Mm.
that really challenge us. And as a coach, I felt like when I start to embed this CLA in my approach, in my pedagogical style, I felt like I don't have the answer. So when I'm trying to plan the season, I I know what I want to do. I know the structures, but I want to be open to things that happen on the practice that I don't know and can emerge. And I can see, oh, this is a new situation. This is a new solution. So I can put this on my structure. I don't have every answer. And sometimes I feel like if you don't do this, if you don't, a coach says do that, and you don't do it because some variable was different. Like the step wasn't aggressive enough, or the ball is leap a little bit, and you got to like it's such a decoupling of perception and action. And I think if we think as CLA in ecological dynamics, we want to have a structure. We want to have a design to afford players to be aggressive, but we got to understand that there's not a solution for everything.
Yeah.
There's not a solution for every situation, and we don't know all the solutions possible.
It's
And that's the
so
why it's
good. Yeah.
such a hard thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's such a
I
beautiful thing too.
it is like because I'm thinking there, I think the best example is maybe coaches become so scripted on not just set plays, but also maybe coverage solutions. And
Yeah,
even, let's say, even something like a switch. Even if a team always switches, the switch is going to be different every time because of the
every single time.
positions, the spacings, the players involved. So you can't just have one or two coverage solutions that you want the players to do because there are literally, yes, you might have one or two things you really emphasize, but there's still going to be so much variability and they need to be flexible to actually look for and attune and act on these things as opposed to just your one or two pre-rehearsed solutions.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. And
So,
then
yeah. No, go for it. Go for it.
no, I'm saying like, and then you can learn from those solutions, right?
That's
Because you
it.
don't have a
Yeah.
coach. Sometimes you really think about a lot of ways to solve, but on the context, things that emerge you didn't even saw before, you didn't even see before. So I think that was impactful for me because now I have an open space on my planning, on my structure too. So this place did that, and I didn't know it. So I can I
Love
can I
that.
can get this situation to my structure too.
That's fantastic. Um, Gabriel, some of my favorite research was the forms of life work by Luis Johara in Brazilian football. and looking
Oh,
at,
yeah, that's great.
it
Yeah.
was, so I got to ask you this just in terms of, obviously basketball's your background, but everyone knows Brazil as a football country. And I think it's so interesting when you consider forms of life and the CLA in that context. So, what are your thoughts just on terms of forms of life that may be more unique in Brazilian basketball, and maybe I don't know if that's anything interesting there in terms of, this is a very loose question, I know, but whether it's forms of life related to player behaviors and maybe how coaches could have an awareness of them or harness them, or maybe even forms of life with coach behaviors and maybe their openness to CLA, or I don't know. What do you think about that?
So that's such a great question, Alex, because I think in soccer we are a really unintentional CLA country.
Yes. Yes.
Unintentional.
Yep.
We don't know that we are, but we are, because in a cultural level, Brazilian guys like to play a lot. We like to have fun. We like to, you know, and we have the soccer culture in Brazil reflects so much that the way of being in Brazil, the form of life, and I think uh, and we have a lot some researches on that too. That we have poverty, we have a really tough country here, and a lot of if you go to soccer players and you see the historical context, they come from a really hard place,
And the
a really economic
favelas and yeah,
place.
yeah,
But in a social level, this is really bad. But when you see it in a ecological dynamic level, you see that they play soccer in such a different context. They play, if you don't have a soccer ball, everything can be a soccer ball. You have a soda can, you gotta organize the thing that you say the athletes gotta count. They count the score. Because they don't have a shot clock. They organize
yeah.
themselves and they play. So when they go to an organized situation, they have so much of degeneracy, the way you can solve problems with different solutions in different contexts, that is crazy. Is really mind-blowing. If you go
Yeah.
to Ronaldinho Gaúcho, Ronaldo, the things that they did was like, and then I don't know if they did come from an organized situation, they would be as talented as they were,
That's it.
because it's such a different context. And basketball, I think basketball is difficult uh, in that situation because to play basketball, you need to have a backboard, you need to have a basket, so you cannot play on the streets. You gotta have a ball that can dribble. So basketball in Brazil is an organized main sport, So if you want to play basketball, you can play sometimes in some streets or some courts, but we don't have a lot, and we don't have so a lot of players play in an organized manner, And
Sure.
Brazil is really I think coaches in Brazil really are oriented with the traditional approach, as in every place,
Exactly. It's everywhere.
But but I think in US is different because the NBA is such a big thing, and the NBA is so related with CLA and decision making and spacing and modern basketball principles, and that will converge so much with the ecological dynamics. And Brazil is a FIBA basketball country, right? So we are really oriented to European basketball. And if you go to Spanish leagues, and they really great, but they still on set plays, on shot clock situations, and I really think is in Brazil we are changing. I'm trying to change. I'm trying to reflect on those things. I'm really an NBA guy oriented, and but I think it's different from soccer. Nothing's like soccer here in Brazil. Nothing's like soccer, and soccer is a really case study for CLA, for real. Soccer is a really strong case study for CLA.
Great stuff. Gabriel, I really enjoyed this podcast episode with you. And we will have a link to your social media on the footnotes of this podcast. And obviously, we will keep coaches in the loop with your dissertation. And hopefully, when it's published, then we can send the link so coaches can actually read it. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
I appreciate much, Alex. You are really an inspiration for my work here. I'm really happy for this. I'm really happy. I'm a great fan. I'm a great fan. All right,
Much
keep enjoying.
appreciated, man.
I'm really enjoying your book, and thank you. Thank
I'm
you for
looking
having me
forward to
back.
talking more. Thank you, Gabriel.